I'm here with Simon Rosenberg with NDN and the New Policy Institute.
It's good to be here, Isaiah.
Thank you. Let me ask you about something that I just saw recently in an ABC News poll. And it speaks to the issue that we have been raising at every conference about the new progressive majority. And we've been making the case that, in fact, the country is more of a progressive country than it is a conservative country. But lately I've been seeing numbers that seem to suggest that that is shifting. In the Washington Post poll, when people were asked, do you want smaller government and fewer services versus larger government and more services, 56% said they wanted smaller government. Another poll, NBC News, the Wall Street Journal. People were asked if they considered themselves very liberal, somewhat moderate, somewhat conservative, or very conservative. 22% said that they were either very liberal or somewhat liberal. 40% said that they were somewhat conservative or very conservative. How does that jive with the idea that we are in a more or less progressive country?
Well, I think
there's a progressive majority.
Sure, and these are great questions. If you look at the election results in the last couple of years, Democrats have gotten 53% of the vote in 2 consecutive elections. The last time that happened, where the country voted, gave a center-left party that large a margin, was in the 1960s. And if you look at the composition of the Democratic coalition, the elements of who were that 53%, and particularly if you look at 2008, let's take that as a snapshot, that coalition is very different than the coalition that Lyndon Johnson used or that was used by FDR. It has many more women, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, millennials, these young people that are going to be the biggest generation in American history that are coming up. And I think what's exciting about the coalition that's been constructed today is that it's a growing coalition. It's young and it's growing. Hispanics and millennials are the 2 fastest growing parts of the American electorate. So the center-left politics, progressive politics today, and I'm going to answer your question, are sitting on the fastest growing and best and most durable coalition they've had since FDR in the 1930s. Okay. It doesn't always feel that way,
right.
But statistically that's true. The Republican coalition, in contrast, is shrinking. It's aging, and it's in decline. Now these are broad trends that are going on over time. Where we are today is that clearly there has been a adverse reaction among large parts of the American electorate towards the Obama era and this era of democratic control and sort of progressive, with progressives having more ideological control in Washington today than they've had since the 1960s.
Right.
And so there's a fight going on.
Yeah.
And whether or not the current party in power can continue to govern off of this new coalition, whether they can beat back the arguments of the other side, is really in some ways what this conference is going to be about and what we're going to be talking about, because this is in some ways the big question. Will the Obama coalition return? Can the Democratic Party learn how to speak to a whole new group of voters? Can a party that grew up, that was a Southern-based party for 160 years, right, become the party of this multicultural, multiracial America of the 21st century? I think the Democrats have got a much more likely chance of getting that done than the Republicans. Because part of what is creating so much anger, I think, and I'll end with this, on the right now, is that there's just fear that this America of the 21st century, this progressive America that's more multiracial, multicultural, that's more integrated into the global economy, that's using things like iPads and iPhones and things that people didn't know, that's a different America. And there's a natural feeling, I think, in parts of the population that, hey, this new America is different than the old America I grew up in. Well, that's the difference between a progressive movement and a conservative one, right? We want to move forward with grace and confidence in the 21st century. They want to hold on to what was dear. That's why I think at the end of the day, in a time of tremendous change, we're in a progressive moment, which is why I think this is going to be a great conference.
So the great amount of attention that's being given to the Tea Party movement in the last year or so, that is masking sort of the underlying long-term trend that we have politically?
No, I mean, I think what's interesting about the Republicans is in recent years, they've been very good at turning out a lot of Republicans and having a very excited base, but not doing so well with everybody else, right? And one of the great success stories of the Bush era was they created a lot more Republicans. was much more intensity in the Republican. They took latent Republicans and turned them out in very large numbers. So what we know today is the Republican base is really excited
Right.
and really wants to get rid of the Democrats. There
Right.
is no doubt about that, right? But if you look at the state of the Republican Party right now, it's a party that is divided ideologically between this new, more radical Tea Party sentiment and the more traditional Republican voter.
Mm-hmm.
They have very weak leadership in Washington with Boehner and McConnell, who were exactly the same kind of guys the country voted out 4 years ago. And they've got no argument about where they want to take the country in the future. They're essentially selling fear of the future as opposed to a plan to make America as great in the new century as we were in the last. So I think the Republican Party is much weaker, actually, in reality than is sort of in the media.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, the Tea Party was a great story,
Okay.
and the media covered it. But at the end of the day, you can make a strong argument the Tea Party movement is doing as much to destroy the Republican Party as it is to propel them to victory in the fall.
But in the meantime, progressives can't rest on their laurels, and they do have to have a message. Now,
Yeah.
What is that message in this time?
I think there are three things that the governing party has to do to ensure success this fall. One is they've got to win the economic argument. I mean, the economy is the number one issue in the country today. We've had 10 years of no wage and income growth in the United States. People are looking to make sure that their government understands their increasingly difficult struggle and has a plan for them. Democrats should be able to win that argument. Second is the Democrats have to embrace this new Obama coalition. The Democratic Party in 2010 will be majority-minority in California and Texas.
Yeah.
We are moving to become a majority-minority country. That's a little bit of a new politics, particularly for older politicians who grew up in an America that was a very different racial and cultural America than we're seeing today. Mm-hmm. And I think that we all have to do a better job at acknowledging the incredible pace of demographic change in the country and understanding that it's going to, we have to teach old dogs new tricks, right?
Right.
We got to help these older politicians who've been around a long time speak to this new audience with grace and confidence. Third is the Democrats have to show and the progressives have to show they can govern and not fight. That they're adults, they can do the hard things. And I think if they can do those three things, right? Win the economic argument, speak to the new coalition, you know, govern like adults, right? And create openness and transparency and accountability in a government. I think that this election will be fine for the other side, for the Democrats and the progressives, in part because I think the other side is offering nothing, and you can't beat something with nothing.
Now, finally, there will be hundreds of progressive activists who will be coming down to Washington on June 7th, 8th, and 9th. What would you hope that these activists walk away with from that conference as they walk and go into their districts?
I think the single thing that I would love to be able to convey to everyone coming to this conference is that center-left politics is stronger today than it's been in 40 years. We have more ideological control in Washington than we've had since I was a year old. And that the coalition that got us here is growing and is better than any coalition we've had since the 1930s. If we do good in the next few years, we could be at the beginning of a 30 or 40-year run of dominance of our values over the other sides. I would love to be able to view this time as a time where we have hope and optimism, excitement about these changes that are going on instead of trepidation and fear. I hope everyone who comes here leaves with the kind of excitement about our future that I have, and with knowing, though, that we're only going to get there if we work hard together and get it done. So that's my basic message.
Thank you.
Sure, Isaiah. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks, man.